What's going on, YouTube? Welcome back into the MLS Digest Show. Glad to have you all back here. It's Decision Day coming up this weekend. It all comes down to this weekend's slate of games. It's the final slate of the regular season before the playoffs start, and there's still so much to be decided. In the East, we still have both wildcard spots up for grabs. DC and Montreal still holding on to those, but Philly and Atlanta are hot on their tails with the possibility of some flip-flopping there. And then obviously other seeding possibilities for who's going to play who. In the West, all 9 teams are decided, including those wildcard spots, with the Whitecaps and the Timbers holding on to those for now. But there's still so many seeding possibilities. The number 1 seed is still up for grabs between the 2 LA teams, and so much more, including who's going to be hosting who in the first round of the playoffs. So we did miss, I think it was week 36, a couple weekends back. Unfortunately, couldn't get around to that, guys. Sorry about that, but we had that weekend. It was a crazy week of games. We had a Saturday and then a Wednesday, and then that week 36 was the following Saturday, so it was a short turnaround. And then in the meantime, we've had the international break ahead of this decision day. Last weekend, there weren't supposed to be any games, but there were 2 actually. Those were only being played because they were postponed games that had to be rescheduled. And the first of those was the Crew taking on the Revs. Crew have been locked into that number 2 spot in the East, and the Revs are already eliminated. They were already eliminated before that game, so it was kind of pointless. I'll kind of get to later here in the next segment about why it wasn't so pointless for the Crew, but the Crew thrashed the Revs as you would expect, 4-0, and Matan got a hat trick with some of the Crew's top guys like Cucho out for the international break. And then the second game actually had way more implications. It kind of has to do with why LAFC still has a chance for this number 1 seed in the West. It was the Whitecaps hosting LAFC, and LAFC had a couple guys out as well for the break, including Boanga. Whitecaps had no Gald. Stuart Armstrong, for whatever reason, wasn't even featured in the squad. And it was Ilie Sanchez with a banger goal in stoppage time to get the 2-1 win on the road. Whitecaps now dropping, I think, 2 or 3 straight, and LAFC puts themselves at least locked into that number 2 seed, but still with a chance to steal the number 1 seed from their crosstown rivals. So let's just get into all the seeding possibilities for this upcoming decision day. So let's start with the East, where we actually missed this because of not covering week 36, but in week 35, Miami went to Columbus and they needed a win to secure that supporter shield. And they did just that. So congrats to them. They got their first supporter shield in their history. And they, of course, now secure that number 1 seed in the East and playoff hosting privileges should they keep advancing. So they're completely set to make a run and do the double and get the cup alongside that shield. And I just really hope, because that game that Miami played against Columbus to secure that was just an absolute classic. Messi with 2 goals right before half. And then Columbus tried to come back, got a couple penalties, and Cucho made his first one, and then Calendar saves the second one super, super late, which would have tied it. And just a classic game, and I hope we get that rematch in the Eastern Conference Final, because that's the way the pathway is looking like should both these teams advance. And moving over to Columbus, they're locked into that second seed like we talked about, but they don't really have much to play for. But the thing is that they obviously want to go back and win back-to-back cups, and that's just their mentality. That's Nancy's. The whole team that's their one goal, or else, this season is not a success, right? So the thing is that should they get there, and probably, they're going to have to beat Miami on the way, there's still the matter of who's going to host the final, depending on who they face from the West. And should it be LAFC in a rematch of last year, then LAFC right now is hot on their tail in terms of that point tally. So Columbus does need points out of this last matchup if they're looking really that far ahead. And obviously, regardless, they are not a team to over-rotate too much, even considering the fact they played this past week for that makeup game. And the other factor here is that I'm going to get into it when we go through each individual match, but Columbus actually faces Red Bulls. They have to travel to Red Bulls for Decision Day, and right now that's looking like the matchup for their first round, because the number 2 seed plays the 7th seed, and that's Columbus versus New York. New York would need a win against Columbus and Charlotte to drop points to jump over Charlotte, because if they were tied on points, Charlotte has that first tiebreaker, which is wins. So it's looking very unlikely that that happens, to be honest. Even though Charlotte does have to go to DC, which they could definitely drop points on the road. But I think Columbus is very, very happy with the possibility of playing New York in that first round series. New York has been qualifying for the playoffs for like 15 years now, or 16, which is just keeps adding to their record across like all U.S. pro sports. But every year they just fade out or just lose in the first or second round. And it's looking like the same this year. So, Forsberg, he's come back. He's kind of been slowly, gradually building match fitness back up again, but he had that long foot injury, and this team's attacking talent just isn't there. They didn't really bolster up on that during the transfer window. So it's looking like a very favorable matchup for Columbus. And I think, if they were playing anyone else, maybe I would think their motivation factor isn't as much as there, even though they are a very driven team under Nancy and they just keep piling on wins. But I think this is one where they're looking at the standings here and they're just like, well, if we can at least limit this to a point, then I think they would very much rather play New York instead of Charlotte, especially because Charlotte has been a bit of a pain in their side. They went to Charlotte and lost 2-0 early in the season, and then it was 1-1 in Columbus later on the season. So I think they're looking at that, and they're gonna go full throttle. And New York has been very vulnerable at home recently, especially even after they started. So I think they were one of the last teams to be undefeated at home. So they're in just poor form recently, and I think Columbus is still going to be going out and trying very much here, or in terms of their lineup. And I think that goes across all these teams, because barring those 4 teams that played this past weekend for those makeup games, such as Columbus, I think most of these teams have been off for 2 weeks, and you don't want to get that rusty before the playoffs start. And so I think you're just not going to see too much rotation for most of these teams. That's because there's a lot of teams as well just have some sort of thing to play for, even if, such as Columbus, that their playoff spot is completely secure. So we move on with Cincinnati, 3rd seed. They're locked into that 3rd seed. They go to Philly on Decision Day, who Philly needs a win to get in and some help. And then Orlando hanging on to that final home playoff spot. They've just been on an absolute tear, especially at home recently. And they would basically just need a point at home against Atlanta on Decision Day, because if Orlando just gets a point and say NYCFC wins, they'd be tied on points, but that first tiebreaker is wins, which then they would be tied on. And then the next tiebreaker is goal difference. And they have a three more goal difference. So, and 4 more goals for, which is that 3rd tiebreaker. So NYCFC would basically have to win by 4 to make up those tiebreakers, and I just don't see that happening on the road, especially for NYCFC. So I think Orlando's going to secure that 4th spot, get at least a point against Atlanta, who is also obviously also very desperate, which we're about to get to. And then the 5 through 7 seeds separated by 3 points. There might be a little flip-flop between Charlotte and NYCFC, but I don't see, like I said, Red Bulls getting out of that 7th seed. And then we got DC and Montreal in those final wildcard spots, both on 40 points. But then you got Philly and Atlanta chasing them. If one of DC or Montreal loses and one of Philly or Atlanta wins, then there would be some flip-flopping, because all of them would be tied on wins. And at 10, say in one of those instances, like DC loses, Philly wins, DC and Philly would be tied on 10 wins. But those goal differences, man, are what's going to kill DC or Montreal or both in the end if they do crumble, because look at that, -15, -18 compared to Philly's +8, Atlanta's -4, and you're just not making that up in one match day. Obviously, because they're the ones lower, and if they win anyways, they're just in. So the thing going for DC and Montreal is that they both host their decision day games. Meanwhile, Philly hosts Cincy, which isn't the easiest matchup. They have kind of had their number this year, and they've had some just banger games in general. So that's going to be a fun one, I'm sure. And then Atlanta, though, has to go to Orlando. I think they're the least likely to, out of those two, to jump up into the wild card standings, to be honest. But yeah, still so many possibilities for the East. And yeah, now let's get into the West. So in the West, there's still a lot of seeding possibilities, as you can see. Galaxy lead by 3 points on LAFC, but they have to go to Houston on decision day, and LAFC gets to host San Jose. So let's be serious. LAFC is going to get that win. They're going to at least force Galaxy to get a result. They just need a tie. And the thing is that if they were to tie on points, then they both have the same amount of wins at 19. And then the goal difference naturally would be at least tied at 19, because say LA Galaxy lose by 1, that goes to 19. And say LAFC wins by 1, that goes to 19 as well for them. But then that third tiebreaker is goals for, which LA Galaxy has a chunky lead for one game, right? 8 goals. And so LAFC basically has to win by multiple goals to just make that goal difference in their favor, in assuming LA Galaxy loses. But like I said, Galaxy just need a point. But Houston isn't the easiest place to play. They've held their home games very low scoring this entire year. They have their own problems and own injuries, such as Herrera and Bassi maybe not playing this coming weekend. And obviously, as you see, Houston in 5th, 51 points. They don't have a chance for one of those home seeds, but 5 through 7 is only separated by 2 points. So they do have something to play for in that sense, because I think I don't know who they'd really rather play in terms of like RSL Seattle or whatever, but there's still the possibility that they can like play LAFC in the first round should Colorado and Minnesota leapfrog them. So yeah, Seattle and RSL tied at 56. Seattle has one more win right now, so that's a tiebreaker. RSL would basically need a win and Sounders to drop points, or a draw and a Sounders loss to jump over Seattle. Seattle hosts Timbers in that Cascadia Cup, and then RSL hosts Whitecaps, who have been really fading recently. So yeah, Houston, Colorado, Minnesota, all very tight. Anything could change in that sense. Minnesota probably has the most favorable matchup because they host St. Louis at home. Colorado has to go to Austin, who's eliminated though. And then, like I said, Houston hosts Galaxy. That's going to be a tight one. Vancouver has to go to RSL, and Portland has to go to Seattle. So Portland can still jump over Vancouver in terms of hosting the wild card game, but neither is looking like they're favored to, at least even win their decision day game. So there's going to be a lot of craziness. Everyone basically still has some sort of seeding to play for. And yeah, I just expect full lineups, full effort, and there's still so much that we don't know. But let's just look at what the playoff bracket would look like going into this weekend. So this is the current bracket. If the playoffs started today ahead of decision day, the wild card winner plays the 1 seed in the first round. So the wild card games are going to be, I think, on like Tuesday and Wednesday right after this weekend's games. And then the first round of playoffs, I think, starts the following weekend. We'll make, obviously, videos ahead of then. But yeah, so right now it's looking like one of Whitecaps or Timbers at Galaxy, and then one of DC or Montreal at Miami. Very favorable matchups for those 1 seeds. Galaxy could obviously still follow that 1 seed, but we'll have to see. I think in the East, I would say that these are more so what it's going to look like for this first round. Like, most of the seeds are pretty set. Like I said, I don't think Red Bulls are going to jump up. And I think it's really only between like Charlotte and NYCFC who's going to be 5 and 6. Because I think Orlando's going to hold on to that 4th spot. It's more so in the West, like literally none of the seeds are decided yet. besides like just RSL or Sounders, who's going to be that 3 or 4. Like they're both set in terms of like a home playoff spot. But I think these are some pretty good matchups, all things considered. I think the West is a little bit more competitive, I would say, in terms of, or just more parity. In the East, I think like maybe Charlotte, I can see Charlotte giving Cincy a run for their money, but like Miami, Columbus, Orlando, like it should be a wash in the East, honestly, in terms of who's like gonna advance. Obviously, there's always gonna be some upsets, but I think that's more so gonna happen in the West. Like I think RSL Dynamo would be a crazy series, especially if Houston gets back to the health with Herrera, because they've had some tight games, including and just good games, including their home and away, Leagues Cup, like that. Those have just been good games. And Sounders have obviously picked up some crazy form. Rapids have been one of the better scoring away teams. So I think there's way more possibilities for upsets in the West. But let's just not get too far ahead of ourselves. Let's see what the bracket ends up being. But like I said, yeah, I think there's way more, obviously, room for turmoil or turnover in the West between right now and what happens on decision day. So let's just see what happens. Let's get into all the games this coming weekend, what to look out for, and who's in, who's out. Okay, so let's get the BS out of the way, because this is one of two matches that have absolutely no meaning. Fire hosting Nashville. Both these teams are eliminated. The only storyline here is that both these teams have newish coaches, with Nashville hiring Callahan in the last kind of third of this season, who was an assistant on the U.S. men's national team. And he was an assistant to the previous head coach of the U.S. national team, Greg Berhalter, who has now officially joined the Fire as the head coach and director of football. So kind of a dual role, stuff you don't really see anymore. And it's going to be interesting to see how he balances both roles. That's kind of a lot of power and just responsibility. But as a Fire fan, I'm more on the hopeful side. I think MLS is his level, so to speak. And I think he will do much more than the previous kind of regimes or whatever and coaches to at least, actually put their money where their mouth is and actually have a genuine kind of approach to trying to make the Fire in terms on an organizational level, like much more serious. So the whole point is just looking forward to next season, see how he starts. And yeah, nothing really to speak about this game. I mean, I feel like Kuipers and Haile Selassie, who have both had kids recently, and especially Kuipers, who's just your DP, I think you don't really want to risk him here, because he hasn't even been playing that much recently down the stretch. So these lineups are just kind of going to be wishy-washy and hard to kind of take this game seriously, hard to make a prediction. Probably just going to be full of goals because no one's going to care, or not. I don't know. But both these teams looking forward to next season. I wouldn't say it was fun while it lasted this season, but this is the last time we're going to be talking about them. Very likely, unless we make a different topic sort of MLS video during these playoffs or whatever. But anyways, good riddance. The first of our serious East games is Montreal hosting NYCFC. Montreal, of course, looking to just secure their wildcard spot. All they need is a draw here. And NYCFC, they need a really, really big win, or just some sort of points. A really, really big win and an Orlando tie to get fourth, which is really not likely. But they would definitely like a point or three to at least stay in that fifth spot. But it's interesting. I wonder who they want to play the most in terms of that first round, assuming they're going to be the road team, because it's kind of going to be Orlando, Cincy, or Columbus. Pick your poison, really. I think definitely not Columbus. So yeah, Montreal at home, they've been decent, or respectable. It's kind of part of why they're in this position, despite their horrid goal difference. 7-5-4 at home. They're actually on a 3-win streak recently at home. Caden Clark has emerged, and it has been playing some of his best footy recently. And then for NYCFC, they're only 4-5-7 away after what was I think an 8-game or 9-game winless run in MLS before and after Leagues Cup. They have now won 3 straight, including that Hudson River Derby and a couple more wins, including a beating of Nashville. I think it was 5-1. So they just seem kind of like a very streaky team, and Santi and Martinez have really been carrying the load in terms of the scoring department. So if they're hot, I think this team can go places and maybe cause an upset in that first round. But like I said, they haven't been a great road team, so hard to kind of predict this one. Montreal is probably going to be playing a little bit more cautiously, but I'm going to go for a 2-2 draw. DC hosting Charlotte. DC, another one of those wildcard teams right now who just needs a draw against Charlotte, who is basically, I think, fine with wherever they end up realistically, and they haven't been as solid on the road. DC's goal difference is horrid, but they do have the leading goal scorer in Christian Benteke. Basically a lock to get this golden boot now. 23 goals. Everyone else behind him, the nearest 3 are actually all the nearest 2, Boanga and Cucho, 4 goals away. I think the only reason, I would say 99.9% is his probability right now, only because I feel like Boanga could definitely score 4 against San Jose, and he's going to have a stat pad session, so I wouldn't put that beyond him. But yeah, he should lock this down. He could probably even score here. Charlotte's defense on the road, especially recently, hasn't been as solid. They've been in better form, locking it down at home, but they're not going to host a playoff game, so it's going to be interesting to see. They can definitely give a team like Cincy or Columbus fits, depending on who they play in that first round. But the odds for this are weird because Charlotte is a big road dog. So I don't know what their lineup situation is going to be. You had a couple of their players go for the international break, like Abada. But this is one I don't want to kind of try to predict. It probably could have goals in it because Charlotte might open up a little bit, just because of I think they're just, like I said, very secure in where they're at. I don't think they don't really run the risk of dropping position. Because, like I said, I don't think Red Bulls are going to catch them. And so they can only go up. I think it could be a little bit of a back and forth. DC, it's going to be interesting to see their approach. I think it's going to be a feeling out process in the start of this game to see what these tactics are. With DC just needing a point, they don't want to really risk too much. But they are just a team that they probably are just going to concede anyways. That's just they're both, the score rate is tremendous. So I could see goals in this one. Charlotte opens up. I'm going to go for another 2-2 draw. Miami takes on the Revs at home to close out their season, and they got the Shield already, but they're going for that points record. They can only beat it and not tie it because the points record is 73, so need a win here for that, and it couldn't come against a better opponent. It's the Revs, one of the worst teams in the league, but the thing is here, the Revs are going to be defending their honor, you would think, because they're the team, like I said, that have that points record currently, and so they don't want to give that up. You still have some players, a couple players from that team, including Carles Hill, but he is actually out for this game. They shut him down for the season with an injury, so that obviously also hurts their chances. And I mean, listen, this Miami team is just special, even besides the main guys. All their younger guys have just been showing up week after week, especially down the stretch here for the Shield in games like that tough one against Toronto. The defending has just been just a little bit more better, especially. And Messi as well, that those 2 goals against Columbus, he just dropped a hat trick and 2 assists against Bolivia. yesterday in the international break. So he's in some really good form. I don't think he's going to be missing out on this one as well. And it's just a straightforward result. So that's why for the first best bet, we have the first leg. We're going with Miami to win. And obviously you have to pair it with something. It's obviously the price is outrageous, but I just want to get in on this party, so to speak. And I just think it's just destined to happen. So there's really everything in their favor to get it done here. And so that's why we're going with this for our first leg. So Philly hosting Cincy. Philly is in a very desperate mode because they need the 3 points. And Cincy on the other end doesn't have much to play for because they're locked into that third spot. And the only thing they really have going for them is that I just don't personally see them rotating too much because, like I said, 2 weeks off, going to the playoffs, and they're especially not in good form. 3 losses in a row now in MLS play. You want to feel better about yourself going into the playoffs. This is a good situation to do that, despite, Philly is going to be a tough opponent in this one because of the situation. But yeah, I just don't see Cincy going too much rest here or rotation. And both these games between these teams this season have just been absolutely delivered. The first one was an MLS play in Cincy where it was just back and forth, and then Lucho Acosta scored a 110th minute winner to win it 4-3. And then in League's Cup, it was actually Union going to Cincy again and winning 4-2. So Philly's fully healthy. Cincy's basically fully healthy on both their attacking ends. And Tyberibo, despite where Philly is in the standings, he's been a man possessed. I have no doubt that they'll be scoring. They're going to get reckless. I think this is going to be a crazy, crazy game that could have just as many goals as those other ones. And so that leads me to, as you see on the screen, is our second leg of the best bet, including that Miami money line. We're going with both to score in this one. That gets us to even odds. And I just like the potential for more and more goals in this one. Union at home, obviously that boosts them. They already have a strong attack, but it's really Cincy's defense that's been their Achilles heel this season. They had a couple of season-long injuries. They tried to reinforce that with some signings. It hasn't really worked out so far. And now you have a Wazim who's hopeful to go here, but even if he does, like I said, it just hasn't been the same kind of Cincy defense we've known. And especially on the road, they've been in some really back and forth games recently. So Lucho has been getting back into health, getting back into form. And Union's defense as well has been kind of why they're in this spot as well. So I think this one could be one that's really back and forth once again. And I think each of these teams can't be really trusted to hold a clean sheet. Philly gets that home boost, and Cincy as well. They need to have some momentum going into these playoffs. So I have no doubt that they can contribute to this one as well. Orlando hosting Atlanta. And like we talked about, Orlando just needs a point here realistically, but I wouldn't put the 3 points beyond them, even considering Atlanta's desperation, who needs 3 points. Orlando is 7 wins, 4 draws, and 5 losses at home. And most of those wins and positive results, including the draws, have come on the back end of this season. They've just been in incredible home form down the stretch here to basically climb out of the bottom of the East to now 1 game away from hosting a playoff game. So kudos to them. They're basically fully healthy, and all their kind of striker options have been really getting into form. Even Muriel, who still has been basically one of the worst DP signings this season. But regardless, yeah, Atlanta as well. This is their last chance. They've been kind of already building towards next season, but they have this chance here. They've been very stingy on the road. I've kind of harped on that in this latter half of the season. I've really been liking what they do on the road. They make it very tough for opponents. They get a little bit more defensive minded and countery, but it gets the results for the most part. Sometimes they've kind of dropped points, like they dropped points against Red Bulls recently, but it's been solid showings on the road. It's kind of just been their home form that's been a shame, but they did beat Red Bulls in that return game just recently, 2-1 or 3-1. So yeah, it's hard not to favor Orlando here, though. They're just honestly much superior team. Moranchuk hasn't completely been that force yet for this team. I think he needed some games under him. It's just really about he's not going to be the kind of DP to carry a team, I think, out of the kind of dungeon they're in right now, how low they are. So it's just a shame where they are. How far down they were this far into the season, and now they're in the spot where they need a win, and I just don't see them getting it. I think Orlando gets this one easily 3-1. Red Bulls hosting the Crew, and as we discussed, this is looking like one of the first round matchups. The Crew would be hosting the Red Bulls in the best of 3, 2 out of 3 games or whatever it is, and I'm going with Crew draw no bet as our second best bet. We're getting plus money on it. They're dogs for whatever reason. I think the books think that maybe there could be rotation. Even so, they have the depth like I've talked about all year. They're obviously one of the top teams in MLS, and I think if it was, like I said, I think if it was literally any other team, maybe they were playing like a lower team, then maybe that motivation wouldn't be there. But I think they see this and they see this matchup and they want to keep Red Bulls in the 7th spot because Red Bulls can only get out of 7th with a win. Crew locked in that 2nd spot, as well as the fact that right now Crew are on 63 points and LAFC is on 61 points. And say Crew draw and LAFC win, and let's not even get into if LAFC gets 1 seed like we were talking about, but let's say Crew draws and LAFC wins. They'd both be on 64 points, but LAFC wins that tiebreaker. Should they meet an MLS Cup, they would win that tiebreaker on total wins by 1 win. So I know it might be a crazy talking point to include because maybe they're not thinking that far, but they want to host MLS Cup because they're already going to have to go through Miami. Like 95% chance that Miami doesn't get upset before that Eastern Conference final. So they're going to have to go through Miami, and I just don't think, I think they want that to be the max of how much they want to travel, right? So they've just been had a home fortress the past 2 seasons with Nancy, and I'm taking the push protection here. I mean, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to take Crew at plus money. I mean, I'll probably take them like almost every week just in general, but this is like another spot where Red Bulls as well have just been completely fading. They haven't been impressive recently. They've just been kind of smacked around. They got smacked around in that derby. They go on the road, beat Toronto 4-1, like, okay, and then they lose on the road to Atlanta. So as much as they really started the season well at home, they're actually, 4 winless now, with a loss to the Union where they were shut out, a 1-1 draw to Kansas City, 2-2 draw to Atlanta where they had to come back and scrape a late point, and then they got bounced 5-1 to their crosstown rivals. So even with Forsberg kind of getting back in the fold, this attack hasn't been that great. And now they got a couple injuries here and there with the Nealis out or suspended, I believe. And so regardless, I think Cucho didn't even play, for example, this past game in that makeup game, and he was on international duty. I don't really even think he featured that much there. So even the guys that went on international duty aren't featuring too much anyways, and it's pretty straightforward here. I think they still have some sort of motivation to play for, and with the push protection we get, I'm going to take a stab at it. This is still just simply the better team. There's a wide gap into why these teams are this separated. We move over to the West, and let's get this one out of the way. This is the second game of 2 that are just completely unwatchable unless you're a fan of the team and just want to see them one more time, or you're a sick individual. So we got 2 teams eliminated here, Dallas and Kansas City, with both kind of just looking for the next season, right? Dallas with their new intermediate or whatever you want to call it coach that came on, and the team's been doing much better with him. It's just, they were so down in the standings, and the biggest thing going for them is that all their DPs are finally healthy, and you can build on that for next season. Kansas City, on the other end, really hard to see where they go from here. The roster is aging. Vermees as well should be on his way out, in my opinion. I don't know how much longer of a leash you could give this guy, even though, obviously he's been the most tenured coach, but I think he has to go. We'll see what they decide, but I think if they keep him, then it's going to be another year of the same, because I think they gave him this leash because the last year they started bad and then made the playoffs, upset St. Louis. But I think the writing's on the wall here. So whatever. This is a game you should not be watching unless you're a fan of the teams. There's much more interesting games with much more at stake. So yeah, that's all I'm going to say about these two teams. Moving on, we got Austin hosting Colorado. Biggest news for Austin, who's eliminated, is that they finally got rid of Wolf, their coach, playing some absolute terrorist ball. Good riddance, because I just couldn't stand this Austin team. I couldn't ever get a good read on them. They just don't play, even by the numbers. They're just a broken team. And with the Driussi situation as well, he's probably going to be seeming to make a move. This might be his last game here. Make a move to River Plate in Argentina. That's been the links with him. So we'll see what happens in the offseason. But yeah, this is their last game. They're going to be at home. Could have a little bit of a boost with this news, right? They want to just end the season strongly, but yeah, it's a team that's been super hard to read for me, so I don't want to, put my money anywhere in that sense. But then we got Colorado, who has been sort of fading recently. They might be getting Bassett back, and maybe Cabral, who's been dealing with his own injury for a couple of months now. That would be good to have in the playoffs. But they could still get the 5th seed, anywhere between the 5th and 7th seed, really. So, I think they're going to send out a full lineup here. Zach Steffen seemed to it's going to be interesting to know his status as well, because he went with the U.S. camp, this international window, and he had to leave because of some sort of side injury or something. So it's interesting to see how much that is potential to affect his availability here, or just for the playoffs. Hopefully it's not anything too crazy, because they're dealing with, obviously, like I said, a couple of their own midfielders and a wingers kind of out. So I think Colorado should get this one done, but Austin at home always has the potential for some more attacking output, and with this kind of new belief, I guess, towards next season without this coach, this game could get a little crazy. But I'm going to go for a 2-1 Rapids win. Dynamo go up against Galaxy. Both these teams with a lot to play for in the sense of the standings. Galaxy want that home playoff advantage throughout the playoffs. They've done all the basically heavy work. They needed to get that positive result against LAFC, where that all started, and they got that crazy comeback in El Tráfico. And since then, they've just been rolling, especially at home. They end the season out undefeated at home, and they would love that, like I said, to play all their playoff games at home. So, unfortunately, LAFC, with those games in hand from a couple postponements, made it seem like maybe Galaxy had it in the bag, but LAFC's schedule down the stretch has just been much, much weaker. They've been playing basically all the bottom of the barrel West teams, and now they end with San Jose. So you would think they get a win there, meaning Galaxy needs a draw here at least. And the road form has been a little sketchy, but they went and got a huge win at Colorado recently. And Dynamo have their problems of their own. They have some very, very real scoring problems. Very big possession-based team, but they've been without their key midfielder Herrera for a handful of games now. He's hopeful to go here and feature in some way. And Bassi as well, though, one of their other midfielders, could be doubtful here. So it is in Galaxy's favor, because Houston hasn't had the same type of home form that they have had in seasons past. And I think they do have enough what it takes to get a draw. Royce is expected to be back in some way as well after dealing with his own little injury. And I think Painsill's status is one to monitor as well. I'm not completely sure, but I've seen some sort of reports where he could be dealing with some sort of issue. So I think they do have enough to get a draw here. Neither team super desperate for the 3 points, you would say. Houston can't get into that 4th spot no matter what. They're just trying to avoid maybe. I wonder who they want to play, because if they stay in 5th, they're probably going to play RSL. They're probably only going to have the potential to play RSL or Seattle. So they don't really completely even control that, because RSL could win and Seattle could drop points and vice versa. So Houston's in this kind of weird situation. They don't have home playoff hosting privileges. So I think they're just mainly focused on their health ahead of these playoffs. So you could see maybe a little bit more of a relaxed tone here out of them. But I like Galaxy to at least get a point here. I'm going to go for, even though the watchability is high, because I think these are 2 exciting teams when they're at their most potential, I think this could be a little bit lower scoring based on Galaxy's approach with just needing the point. I'm going to go for a 1-1 draw. RSL hosts Whitecaps, with both teams still needing and preferring to get some points here, because even though RSL can't slip out of 4th for that final home playoff spot, I'm sure they would most rather have as many 1-ups on teams as possible if they advance further down in the playoffs. So they would like to be above Seattle, because Seattle's home field advantage is very real. And so they can jump up above Seattle, but they need a win plus Sounders to just drop points, or a draw, or Sounders to get a up and Sounders to get a loss to jump above them. Plus, they're at home. They have this altitude advantage against Whitecaps. They actually beat Whitecaps on the road earlier this season. And Whitecaps as well, they can still slip into that 9th spot and not even host the wild card game against Timbers. But they would need Timbers to get a result as well at Seattle. Not the easiest thing, but it's still possible. And they can actually still get into 7th place if they win and Minnesota gets a loss. So they can completely get out of the wild card altogether and avoid playing what's looking like the Galaxy. But it's interesting, because if they do get out of it, they would likely play LAFC. And LAFC has really had their number, like we just saw in that makeup game this past week. Like, going back this season, last season's playoffs, like LAFC just completely owns Whitecaps for whatever reason and the play styles. But still, they're still playing to at least host and secure hosting the wildcard games. So here, for the best bet, I'm going with the over 3.5. We're getting plus money. I don't love taking over 3.5s, but that's just what the MLS market kind of has become now. You either kind of take, if you have over 3, that's better with the push, or you take both scoring over 2.5. But I'm going to take the plus money here. I think this has a lot of potential for goals. We got on the side of the RSL, in their last home game against Minnesota, one of their better or main center backs, Brian Vera, spit on his opponent. So now he got a red card for that, and he's going to be suspended for this game and whatever their first playoff game is, which is a big loss for them defensively. They started off the season in just an insane form. They were actually going for like the biggest unbeaten streak in MLS history for one season or whatever. And that was also due to part their defense, and that's really faded this season. Even at home, they've been in some very, very back and forth games. And Whitecaps on the other end, they've been fading as well. They have some issues. I don't know what's going on with Stuart Armstrong, their DP from England. He completely was not in the squad last week, even despite being healthy. Like, he's been, when he signed, there was the deal of him becoming match fit. But so he was just playing like these 20-minute increments every game. I think he played like 45 in one of the recent games, but now he just completely left off the match sheet. So you would think he's back for this one. Whitecaps were missing so many players due to the international break in last week's match. So they're gonna get guys like Gald, their entire basically midfield, like Vite Kubas, Adekugbe, they're one of their wingbacks. They should be full strength. Brian White's been healthy. Pico as well, who I didn't even mention, coming back from Haiti. So they should be full strength here, and they need to have some sort of positive momentum going into postseason because they've just been really, especially at home, they've been one of the best road teams for some time in MLS play. So it's been on the road where they've had most of their success. RSL, I'm looking at you, Chicho, because this guy's been ghosting since coming back from that suspension and injury, kind of half and half thing right before the All-Star break. Like, this guy was basically the golden boot leader, had that suspension and stuff, and since then his confidence has just been shot. You took away who was it? Gomez, who was their transfer out, and then you bring in Goncalves and Marchuk, the other wingers. They've been pretty good in terms of the wing play. It's just been about that finishing. That last match against Minnesota, he had a couple chances where you could see he's lacking that confidence, but I think the situation just presents itself for goals. I think Whitecaps is going to be full strength. RSL's defense hasn't been as strong recently, and I'm liking Chicho to get back on track, and just this attack in general. Everyone's going to be healthy on that end, so I'm going to take a flyer here. Both teams can definitely contribute, and this could get this both, especially RSL. They would love to, being that they host a home playoff game in the first round, or like 2 out of 3 in the best of 3. They want to really put on the burners here in their final regular season home match. So I'm gonna lean towards that. They probably carry this total, but Whitecaps, with being full strength, I'd like them to kind of pounce on this pretty weaker RSL defense. Minnesota hosts St. Louis in a rematch from earlier this season where Minnesota completely destroyed St. Louis' chances at catching them in the playoff race. They were in the 9th spot at that time, Minnesota, and they completely destroyed St. Louis on the road. And now they're back home here in the 7th spot, and they still have the potential to climb a spot or two, as well as needing to avoid falling back into those wildcard spots. And they have a great matchup here. St. Louis, obviously, just terrible defensively, but I think they're just gonna send the main squad out there. St. Louis is with the Germans and all them, Teicher, Becker and all them. Just being that they get more experience in MLS play ahead of next season. Obviously, they're building towards next season. It was just a little too late this year in terms of getting those signings because of how big the gap was in the standings. But I think they definitely have a positive outlook for next season. And this is another one where should probably expect a lot of goals. I've been on St. Louis in that regard in some angle for most of their matches down the stretch here this season, but this is one I'm avoiding just in that sense. I do expect the goals here, but Minnesota as well. Yabo has just been on a heater, their own signing. But this defense has been actually really impressive recently with the clean sheet marks. But it's hard to expect that against the St. Louis attack, even though they are at home. They should probably be getting the win here, but at the same time, they have been a little bit. There's a reason why they're in the spot they're in. They've just been a little bit inconsistent. They've had they had a very just streaky periods this season. Such a hot start, a super low to fall basically almost out of the playoff spots, and now they're back kind of in form, so to speak. So I would say like 3-1 Minnesota here with likely a lot of goals involved, but St. Louis could definitely have the potential to play spoiler. It's just really a spot where I don't want to trust the team. Goals should be present or whatever, but Minnesota, I say 3-1. For our final best bet, going with a bit of a juicier play here, pretty straightforward play. LAFC team total over 2.5. It's all set up for them to potentially steal that 1 seed from Galaxy. They've been playing a very cupcake schedule down the stretch here, including St. Louis, Kansas City a couple times, and now they finish off with the Quakes, who could honestly just rotate because they have a lot of youth in their system. They could just send out a whatever lineup, and even if they don't, even their main squad is just most of it, there should be turnover from this year to next, and there's a lot of guys that just don't aren't even MLS, quality or whatever. Like they just haven't been meshing, whatever it may be. They have the wooden spoon. I should have put that graphic in there in the slide, but they've won the wooden spoon for a reason, and LAFC as well has just been completely dominant against them. They just don't, not even that they don't take them lightly, but whatever. They pour the goals on them as they should be doing. And this is one where LAFC does need a multiple goal win, even if Galaxy drop points. So, or not drop points, lose. So, unless LA Galaxy loses by 2. But regardless, they're just going to control what they can control, right? And one other storyline here is that Carlos Vela, I don't know if we discussed this on the show. Maybe it was in the meantime where we missed the week 36. But Carlos Vela signed back with on the last day of like the free agent deadline, and he still hasn't featured though. So it's like this guy hasn't been playing in like a year or whatever, and you're saving him for the playoffs. Like I feel like he's just gonna mess with this. Like he knows the system, but I feel like if he's not match fit, like he might mess with this chemistry they have kind of going or the system. But it remains to be seen. Like, is he gonna feature here at all? Like, are you just gonna throw him into the playoffs for like 15 minutes, assuming you're up in a game, or like what? Like, I don't really like, I guess, or have a positive outlook on how this is being handled right now. But we just have to see what happens. Hopefully, he still has like that. He obviously still has that quality. It's just about his fitness and like his age now, right? So. Regardless, though, this is a pretty straightforward play. Everyone's going to be back for Galaxy from that standpoint. You had a couple players out on the break like Boanga, Oliveira, and they obviously played last week at Whitecaps. But regardless, Boanga plays every 90, international break or not. And, yeah, I just have no worries that LAFC can contribute on their end. I was debating between this and like the spread, like 1.5 or something like that, but Quakes could get a couple in. LAFC have a couple of defenders kind of out. Murillo's getting kind of eased back in time for the playoffs. So maybe you could see him featuring here for a little, but regardless, this should be a basically straightforward thrashing. I'm just gonna bite, honestly. It's decision day. Let's have a little bit of fun. There should be goals flying around everywhere for the most part. But, yeah, that's going to close it out for our best bets. To close out the entire Decision Day slate, we got a Cascadia Cup derby to actually decide the entire cup. And you see Sounders here in the third in the West, Timbers ninth. Sounders playing to hang on to that third spot. They're going to host a home playoff series no matter what, but they want to get over RSL. And Timbers, actually, they can leapfrog Whitecaps if they win and get some help from RSL against Whitecaps to host that home playoff wildcard game. But they can't get over the wildcard game. They can tie Minnesota on points if Minnesota also lost, but they would not get that tiebreaker due to the amount of wins they have. So the wildcard game is the best shot they got, is the only chance they get. But besides that, like we're saying with the Cascadia Cup, as you see here, Whitecaps actually topping the table right now, but they've played their last game in this cup. So it's impossible for them to win here because of the goal difference as well. Timbers and Sounders both have a better goal difference, and one of them have to at least get 3 points, someone's getting points here. With a tie, they would all be tied on 8, and that actually would give Timbers the cup because of the goals for, because they'd be both tied on 8 points with the Sounders and tied on goal difference as well. So they'd win on the goals for by 1. So Sounders need to win here to get the cup as well. So that's the other kind of motivation in this game. And I do favor the Sounders here. They've just been running the table at home. They've really picked up their form just in general. They've been very healthy as well. They do have an aging group, but with that also comes experience. And besides that, some of their younger players like Rothrock, De La Vega, and just especially their wingers like Rothrock have just been kind of like I said, but what they make up for in maybe talent, like they just have that desire to just keep running at you and challenging the wingbacks for 90 minutes. And that's led to a lot of their success. They just know how to get on that counter and break super, super effectively. And Timbers on the other end, it's just a shame because for as much attacking output they have and how many players they have over like the double-digit goal mark this season, and with Evander's like MVP level video game numbers, they're barely scraping the wild card, and it's just insane that their defense can't really even live up to like half of what this attack has been. But that's kind of the risk they run with the tactics they play with. But because of that, they're just not going to host a home playoff series or whatever, and they have the chance of not even making the actual playoffs in general because they first have to win in the wild card round, which at the moment they're not even going to host that. So it's just a shame. Hopefully some changes are made over the offseason or whatever to get this team a little bit more, solid defensively or whatever. But they've also just been in a rut recently. They have back-to-back winless and been shut out against Austin and Dallas, both at home. Like, that's unacceptable, honestly. And going into the playoffs, that's just not the form you want, because that's really what you've been relying on is your attack. And they're just not looking confident right now. They're trying to basically like pass the ball into the net. They're just trying to be perfect, and it just looks like they're in their own heads. And even in the last game, in this Cascadia Cup, where the Timbers beat Sounders 1-0 at home, and it took a Mosquera like deflected goal. That like kind of just took a weird deflection, trickled in over the keeper's head. And it was actually the backup keeper because Stefan Fry got a concussion in that early on in that game. He's going to be back here. The Sounders are, like I said, very healthy. And you also have Kamal Miller out for the Timbers in this game. So to me, it just screams the Sounders win. Obviously, they probably just need like a point here to secure that third spot. But they're still, like I said, they need the win for the Cup. So they want to get that one up over the Timbers. Whitecaps actually won the Cup last year, but they can't go back-to-back here because of this. And so, yeah, I'm going to lean the Sounders here to close out the slate, close out the regular season with a 2-1 win. Thanks for tuning in. As always, everyone, really appreciate your support. We got Decision Day on hand in the coming days this weekend, Saturday. All of each conference's games are played at the same time, actually. I probably should have mentioned this earlier, but that's the scheduling for this. So all of the East slate begins first with 7 games. All those games are going to start at 6 p.m. Eastern. And then the West slate, all those games are going to be played, 7 of those at 9 p.m. Eastern. So, you watch one slate at once, the other one at once, so that no kind of funny business is going on in terms of teams. Everyone's going to be playing at once, so you can't really know what's going to happen in these other games. You just have to go out and do your business, and that makes it more exciting. Gonna have to be scrolling through games, or just do there's that MLS 360 option where they kind of cycle through the games. But it should be an exciting decision day. It's crazy that the season has just passed this fast, it seems like, doing these videos week by week. But that we're gonna be back and continue making this content for the playoffs as we get into that. The wild card round starts like I said, Tuesday or Wednesday, right after this Saturday's games. And I think between Saturday and the wild card, or around that wild card, we're going to make a video for those wild card games. But I also want to make a video talking about the end of season awards, which haven't been announced yet. The kind of short lists or whatever have been announced. But those are going to be kind of actually decided on, I think, like right before the actual main playoffs start, or around then. So I want to get a video out talking about who I think is going to win those awards, who I favor for those. And kind of just discuss that outside of like the main sort of week by week previews we do. So look out for that between this weekend and the wild card games, including a wild card preview. We'll make sure to get those out. So once again, thanks for watching, everyone. Go enjoy Decision Day. Best of luck with your bets if you're going and placing those or tallying. And we'll see you ahead for the wild card round and the award season kind of discussion. See you guys.